Today's topic is going to be about the energy of politics with the recent passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Everything got pushed into the forefront. And with this even election cycle, the energy is at an all-time fever pitch. Now, this show isn't going to be about which side you should choose, nor is it about which side is right or wrong, because as we're about to discuss, politics is a lot about duality. Politics is a lot about the divisiveness, but also the idea that there are two sides to every story. Not everything is 100% correct, and not everything is 100% wrong. And I'm going to actually turn it over here to TC as we bring in our guest this week. And TC is going to do the introduction. But more importantly, I'm really excited to do a podcast like this because this really is where you put the rubber to the road in terms of intuition, because we're here in the United States having a vote. And it is the preconceived notion that we have one vote, one voice, and it carries on. But we're going to talk about the energy of that entire cycle. All right, TC, take it away. Get us started.
All right. So this week we have a very special guest. When Brandon decided to talk to me a couple of days ago, guys, because sometimes that's how we fly by the seat of our pants about the topic on RBG and her energy in the Supreme Court, and having a woman with her energy, her style on the court, and having her pass. I knew of one person only that I could think of that would be phenomenal in discussing this. And that is our international guest today, John Lindsay. He is the executive for corporate partnerships at the University of Oxford's Said Business School, where he leads corporate relations and fundraising for the school. He also serves as an independent consultant to the U.S. Department of State and the Office of the United States Trade Representative, where he advises on trade engagements in both Latin America and Southeast Asia. Previously, he has served as a foreign policy advisor, and I'm going to say this wrong. I know I'm going to say this wrong. I'm not going to the Buttigieg presidential campaign. Did I say that completely wrong, John?
Yeah, it's Buttigieg. The easiest way to describe it is saying the words boot, edge, edge over and over.
Okay, boot, edge presidential campaign, as well as a consultant for Nathan Associates supporting trade engagements in the Asia Pacific area. When not organizing Democrats that live in the United Kingdom as a board member of Democrats Abroad, he also actively fundraises for progressive candidates up and down the ballot.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
John, thanks so much for being a part of this. And I just want to kind of do I've got Jesus in the lotus position over here. And, you said Buddha judge. And I was like, hey, Buddha, well, not quite. But anyways, listen, welcome for, to coming to this. And I know that this is not necessarily, this is a little bit of an unconventional way to look at politics and a little bit of an unconventional way to see things. But I actually think this is the way that we're going, in the age of consciousness, as we're, really kind of understanding things. More and more people are starting to apply their political view to where they feel that we're going, not only as a society, but a humankind, which is why you see such polarizing outrages. And, and obviously you've certainly worked with the Democratic side of things, but, maybe you can talk a little bit about what was your process when you started to make choices politically, and, and what were the things that appealed to you?
Well, I think, wow, that's a great question. I'd start by saying that America is suffering from a lack of empathy, and I think that our dearth of empathy has driven a lot of this polarization. And I have been attracted mostly to candidates and policies that I think not only move forward a progressive agenda that I believe in, but I think also speak to a need for empathy in our politics. I think if you think about a lot of our great social and political leaders, one of the main threads throughout them, whether you agree with their policies or not, right, is their ability to be generally empathetic to a wide number of American people and people around the world. I think it's why for so long, obviously, American political and economic power has sort of had us be the moral leader in a lot of contexts. But I think it's also because America, by and large, has led with values that has put us in a position to be a moral leader. And so in my personal activism and the people that I work for, in the issues that I move forward, I think something that has both benefited me in my career, but also has drawn me to working in these spaces, has been an exercise of returning empathy and understanding for different viewpoints and perspectives to our political discourse. And I think has also, frankly, has helped me quite a lot, because it's a lot easier to work with someone that you don't agree with when you work on the basis of both of us fundamentally want the same thing. We just have completely different perspectives on how to get there, and as opposed to working from the perspective of this person is wrong or evil and is trying to do wrong and evil things. And I think leading with that empathy has been something that I found quite helpful.
Well, and I think you just said a ton there, a ton. And I want to kind of emphasize one part about the empathy. Most of the people that have an awareness, journey, whether their awareness journey is to become, intuitive or work with mediumship. And, and John, I know we're just meeting and our bio doesn't reflect things yet, but the work that we do around here is like, we really kind of encapsulate empowerment for people to really understand their own gifts and apply it to the world. And one of the things that I hear most often is, this is just ugly to them, because they are empaths. They are, these people sometimes, there's a section of this, not everybody is a generalization, but a lot of people sometimes have the tendency of like, just to kind of give you a characterization, and again, not across the board, but not unconventional. These are people that go to the mall and like they're in there for 10 minutes and it's just too much energy, so they take off. Now, translate that into, I have to vote. I have to participate in this. I have to listen to both sides. And it's not necessarily about which side is right or wrong, or which, I mean, 25 years ago, we didn't talk about fact checking.
Yeah.
We didn't have in-moment fact checking. But when do you think that the energy, and maybe it's just the stakes, but, when did we get to a point where we had to just second guess everything? How do you think we got here?
Well, I think, there's definitely been a lot written about this, the death of truth or the death of expertise in America. And I think, frankly, that's largely been a concerted effort by people who have particular interests that benefit them personally, and having expertise or, for instance, scientific facts coming up against the model of what personally benefits them, then makes it's easier to simply produce a certain set of fake facts or alternative facts, if you'd like to use a certain parlance, that refute that idea, as opposed to actually being willing to work together to meet some kind of middle ground. And I think a lot of that's because about frankly, a path of least resistance, right? Not necessarily because they, you'll find a lot of Republicans on the Hill personally do understand that climate change is real and is certainly negatively affecting our environment and our world. And in the long run will negatively affect them personally as well. But in the meantime, they're much more concerned about the fact that they're going to be primaried by someone who doesn't believe climate change is real. And that drive to not be primaried is much more important to them than alternatives. And on the Democratic side, right, I mean, we certainly have issue areas that we might get bogged down in that are fundamentally about serving certain constituent groups, as opposed to necessarily, policies and agendas that would be beneficial to, writ large. So I think I don't want to make it clear, it happens to a certain extent on both sides. I would say that the death of truth in a large regard, it has more one side to blame than the other. But I think that by and large, we both sort of play into this. And I think the other thing, right, is that the other issue of this is that it's also it's very hard at times for many everyday people, myself included, to see how these larger policy discussions are actually relevant to their everyday lives, right? The irony in American political discourse is that the thing that receives the most interest is the Senate, the House, and the White House, or actually the thing that most directly impacts people's lives are their town council meetings, their city council meetings, who picks up their garbage, who handles the utility in their local district. And so but they have the lowest levels of voting participation. They have the lowest levels of voting engagement. They have the lowest levels of voter understanding. So I think it's also a reframing of what's dominating news cycles is not necessarily what's actually most important or relevant to people's lives. And that's what also disenfranchises them from ever participating because they're like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and by the way, TC's smiling because I finally met my match on a discussion where I can't get a word in edgewise.
I'm sorry.
You're
I apologize.
No, John, no. Actually, I'm applauding it because we're bringing you in as a guest because you have a level of expertise, and quite frankly, you're really kind of enlightening the complexity and the lexicon that we're all feeling because you said a couple of things and. From the perspective of a teacher, and I teach intuition, the work that I do is I help people on their path. So I don't care if I'm at a school district and I'm teaching mindfulness. I don't care if I'm at the, police training unit. I don't care if I'm working with, adult level learning where they're trying to figure out like, what are all these feelings? How do I kind of harness this? How do I heal from certain things? There is a common conversation that eventually happens every single time, and the word truth is actually at the centerpiece of it. Whether it's your authentic self and the truth of who you are, or the truth of like, why does that relationship always feel odd? Or why do things always kind of appear as a certain thing? Mm-hmm. And I think it's because, truth is shed on it. But here's a really important energetic question. Why do you think that we get into this and news cycle aside, because that's a whole other topic. I do think that the news cycle is more about selling newspapers. I know that they're almost not existent, but it's about ratings. It's about news cycles. It's about how many people tune in. Exactly. So it's tied to the dollar amount. But why do you think that when people see irrefutable evidential truth, I'm an evidential medium, so I actually have to show evidence in a reading that I'm connecting with a past loved one. I have to give them something specific. I have to be able to, how did you know that? That is a commonplace thing. Mm-hmm. So in evidence, it is a belief-based form. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, it's the truth. But why do you think people have gotten to the point where you say the sky is blue and the immediate knee-jerk reaction is no, it isn't? And I think that has consumed politics. What do you think the trigger was for that to happen, or is it just a slow evolution?
I think part of it is the access to information, accurate or inaccurate, is at a level with which it has literally never been seen before, right? The amount of information that's available readily on the internet or from, your mom on Facebook or whatever. Means that people are much more overwhelmed now. And there are, of course, far few filters for getting rid of the inaccurate or simply wrong things from the accurate and correct things, right? We used to rely on the three, public channels with the one nightly news broadcast to give us what was factually accurate every single day, right? Platforms like Facebook by regulatory design are not mandated to filter for accuracy. They're not supposed to because they're platforms and not publishers. And so I think because we now are mostly existing in spaces that are largely unregulated and we are expected to regulate them ourselves as far as accuracy of information, the reality is we're really bad at that because we are emotional beings. And so largely we are driven by what we feel makes sense as opposed to what actually makes sense, right? If people watching John Lewis getting beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we're going to be lived on Facebook. If that experience lived on Facebook, you would have a very not insignificant portion of the population who would say, well, clearly he deserved it on some level. They must have broken some kind of law. And that's informed by the fact that it's uncomfortable for them to see themselves as the cop and not as John Lewis. And I think instead, by having Edward R. Murrow and other members of the news media be like, they violated exactly no laws. And they were beaten by a cop that was doing this largely because they are Black, and not have any other space in which to largely refute that. It made it so that the more emotionally safe place for them to go was to be John Lewis in that moment and not Paul Connor. So I think that that's an important part of it too.
Yeah, and I think this is also something where, there's a whole segment of this, and I actually speak out about this a lot, and it's called conspirituality, where everything is a conspiracy. They don't tell us what essential oils do. It's because they want us to be sick, and it's pharmaceuticals. Well, as much as I will rail against the pharmaceuticals for having an inappropriate behavior of what the progress we should have, they have every right to make a dollar. Like we're still in a capitalist society. However, it gets out of control when it's like, okay, and again, you get little slivers of evidence. You get the Bilderberg group, you get the this, you get the that, you get the, when Tip O'Neill's book came out in like the mid 80s, it was the first political thing I ever read. And, it was funny. His book was the most unpartisan thing I'd ever read. I expected him to be like mudslinging and this, that, and the other thing. No, he was friends with the Republicans because they were his ride. He was getting sauced, and then he was like, okay, here you go. It's like, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you. I'll buy. You got it. Like, that's how his relationships were. And, the conspirituality part of this is that we were lied to once. So I think we're programmed to begin to say, this doesn't fit. This isn't the entire narrative. This is what my gut feeling, because you brought up emotion. And I know that this is, when you start bringing up bigger topics like this, it's in the political lexicon, but politics never brings it up because it would actually unveil the truth. If you had a candidate today saying, guess what? Everything that's been published, the 9/11 Commission, here's all the excerpts. Here's all the stuff we didn't tell you. The Kennedy assassination. Okay. And then you bring in science. You bring in the science of it saying, okay, well, this is the reason why buildings fell. Okay, well, science doesn't agree with you. And then, okay, well, this is the angle of this shot, and science doesn't agree with you. And you bring in these things. So now when a candidate, and again, I don't care which side, says whatever, the alternative fact is just putting the cart before the horse. Like it's almost like they're getting ahead of the lie and trying to get it to the narrative that they need to, that becomes their platform, and then go from there. But we have such upheaval right now. And I want to turn this over to TC for a question, because I know this was a passion. This was actually how TC and I kind of, when she turned to me and she goes, I want to reach out to somebody. This would be a really good topic. So
I was writing down other parts for this, but you kind of caught me off guard here because I'm just listening to John and missing him so much, him and Jackie, and in awe of just, oh my God, like I just have to say how much that you've just grown. And I just sit here and I'm like, well, this is why I should definitely not be talking in this topic at all, because everything out of your mouth, I'm like, I don't remember taking that class. I don't remember this part. Oops. So that's why I said I defer to you. But one of the main reasons, John, that we wanted to have you on was because we were talking about in all of this energy and this climate that we're facing here in the United States. Unfortunately, the passing of RBG was very heavy. But she had a specific energy. She had a way about her in the Supreme Court. And we were looking at the energetic value of having a woman on the Supreme Court. And I know that you had, on the day she passed, reposted the story that you had shared when you had met her. And I just was wondering if you could share that with us.
So I'm trying to think. I think it was, let me double check. I think it was in 2014. I was in the best airport in the world, Albany International Airport. I was flying standby back to DC because I'd been home for something, I assume a holiday. And our flight's getting held up. It's getting held up, and everyone's kind of getting disgruntled. And, it's the end of the day. No one really wants to be sitting in the terminal anymore. And finally, coming down the hallway at the terminal is Justice Ginsburg, flanked by a couple of U.S. federal marshals. apparently she had been coming from some talk I think she was giving at University of Vermont's law school, and of course the closest regional airport is Albany, and so it took her a little while to get back, and they held the plane for her. And it was funny because in that moment, these nine people are so fundamentally important to everyday American life, right? I mean, literally hundreds of millions of women in the United States have the ability to apply for a credit card without seeking their husband's consent because of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the work she's done in the Supreme Court, right? And both as an appellate and also as a judge herself. But most people don't know who any of these people are, except in appointment years. And so I am sitting there freaking out while everyone else is continuing to scroll through their iPhone, because clearly she's just like an old lady with osteoporosis, and just no one else knows who she is. And she very kindly apologizes to the gate agent for being late. They originally issue her was the only other available seat. I get the other seat. But it's in coach. And so we board the plane, and her marshal comes over to me and asks if I'd be willing to swap seats because I got the seat in first class. And I mean, first class, the plane has maybe 100 seats on it. Basically, I got a little extra leg room. And for security purposes, they want her to deboard the plane pretty quickly in Washington. So I was like, yeah, that's not a problem. I'll gladly switch seats. So we switched seats. The flight's like 45 minutes. We land at DCA. And because now I'm at the back of the plane, I get off last. And she waited for me. And at the gate, along with the marshal didn't fly with her. She had a member of her one of her clerks meet her at the airport to drive her home. And she thanked me. And it was just the most like, they give you, first of all, like in general, you're never supposed to meet your heroes, and people in politics are always supposed to be, not what they seem. To your point, Brandon, about the Tip O'Neill book, right? And she was exactly what you expect of her. She was, like the kindest grandmother that anyone had ever met. And in that moment, she was incredibly gracious and was like, thank you so much. And, I was like, I took a moment to say that she was my hero, and that, she really inspired me to be an activist. And I think, I think to your point on the energy of having a woman on the court, she has this famous line about at what point will we have enough women on the court? And she's like, when there are 9, is there, for a couple, 100 and something years, there have been 9 men, and we haven't really had a problem with it. And I think it's true that, she was so capable at not only moving the court to realize the importance of intersectionality from both a gender and race perspective. She, of course, had a massive impact on the jurisprudence of the court and of the United States court system writ large. But I think she also, very famously was very good friends with Antonin Scalia. The two people could not agree on pretty much anything as far as legal jurisprudence is related. But I think she brought that kind and loving energy to the court that enabled the two of them to be very, very close friends, where she gave the final eulogy at his funeral. And if you can't, there are some certainly on the left and on the right that would say that that's also the problem of Washington, right? That all these people intermix and whatnot. But I'd also say that our court system, the vast majority of the time, it's a 9-0 decision. And a lot of that comes out of effective dialogue and meaningful facilitation. And for lack of a better non-gendered term, the skills that being a mom naturally teaches you that being a dad probably naturally doesn't. And I think you saw through the Sandra Day O'Connor court and her presence in the court, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's president on the court, and now Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, you do see the important impact of having a woman's voice in these halls, and one that will be sorely missed, not only by progressives, but I think, but by the country in general.
Yeah, and I think your story is very consistent with all the other stories of about Ruth, and I'm going to act like I know her firsthand because she will come to me in a dream at some point. I'll connect with her. By the way, that's a Medium joke. And then, but more importantly, listen, you've been in the UK too long. That was pretty dry. But I think it's something where, when you talk about women, I always look at everything as energy. So, is there, as you get into the layers of energy, and each energy has its own purpose, and it's not good or bad. That's the thing. It's like we want to quantify it in us versus them. And I think the politicized side of men and women, and race equality, and the list goes on, is that it's the idea that now that if you give a woman a fair shake, then, you're so anti-man. Mm-hmm. Or if you're giving another culture, it blows up. It blows up into each section. We fail to recognize that, you actually said something, I don't disagree with it, but I think it's an evolved, topic in that, when you say, okay, well, a woman being a mother gives you one perspective and a man being another wouldn't give you that perspective, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we start to combine that and allow ourselves to recognize that, your perspective, your journey, like me as a medium, I have all these experiences that have led me to be able to connect with somebody the way that I connect with them. Well, if it's, if I'm honoring all of that, I'm that person in that moment. Somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg had all of these experiences that led her to this. And a lot of people don't recognize, when it comes to politics, I'm a hobbyist at best, but I'm always about the backstory. I'm about her meeting people in an airport. I read an article shortly after she passed away, a 32-year-old woman who's now, doing activism, but not necessarily political activism, wrote her a letter when she was 9 years old. And Ruth took the time and wrote her back. Then when the mom was going to Washington, she's like, I'm just going to try. We'll see how it is. She knew exactly who she was. She's like, yes, we'll meet, arranged for a 5-minute meeting and talked about it. And she's like, I still have the letters. Like, that is a character that exists. Like, that's the part of it. That's the part of it for me with her. I don't care about politics. I care about the person. And if you want to go a deeper dive into the politics, when she worked really hard with Rehnquist, which was another piece of that a lot of people just missed. It's like it was deciding to polarize. I don't want to say she ate crow. She helped design the practical application of the law so then one half didn't get shafted. So even when it was a, quote, Republican, ruling, it was a 5-4 or whatever, and she might have been on the 4. She did the work behind the scenes to say, if you have this verbiage in it and it passes, that's great. I fundamentally can't support it. But if you have this verbiage in there, this is how it should really kind of read. So even in losing moments, she still won because she came together. So her energy was a part of it. And do you think that we've lost that idea, or is it always like a win now mentality? Or is it more of a, gosh, we have to abide by our principles in such a way that we're, politics has become a cult. We identify with the principles that are never really applied practically.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a challenge on a bigger level?
I think that, so right now you definitely see this in the internal Democratic discussion about whether or not we should be in favor of this idea of increasing the number of justices that sit on the Supreme Court, right? And the notion being basically that, and I see this as largely a dialectical response to the decision to not confirm Merrick Garland, even though there was more than 200 days before the election under the last year of President Obama's term, as opposed to, we are now 29 days away and we're talking about confirming a new Supreme Court justice.
Well, don't you believe that's pure politics?
Well, I think that the discussion within the Democratic Party about whether or not we should be about packing the court is fundamentally a at what point do the values not get us anywhere discussion, right? At what point does and it's a point of like, if they're not going to play by any sort of values-based rules, and you can agree with that statement or not, then why the hell should we continue to do that? And I think for me, where this point breaks down, right, is there's always the point of like, okay, but where does that end? And I don't know how I feel necessarily about that, but I think I think that the point of the ultimate goal for us should be to depoliticize the law, right? To depoliticize the court. So for me, I'd like to reframe the question as not should we pack the court, but do we really think it's a great idea to have people who have lifetime appointments to such a monumentally important part of our legal system? Or do we really think it's a great idea to have so few people have a very large impact on the lives of literally hundreds of millions of people? And if we're going to have a discussion about increasing the number of justices on the court, instead of framing it as let's pack the court so we can then shove through the things that we want, why don't we say, hey, let's increase it to the point where no one single justice is so fundamentally important, and it'll drive us back to some kind of median, right? Like, and we have them replaced on a say 9-year term or 7-year term, right? So we have an understanding of how many of them are coming on and coming off, and you have it outside of an otherwise political calendar between the Senate and the White House, and you then are doing as much as possible structurally to depoliticize the process.
That's such an American thing to do, though. To put in controls and processes that gain opportunity for another cycle. We love our cycles here. We love our cycles. We love them. So
but I think the trade-off, though, is that the trade-off is either rage, which helps absolutely no one, or the trade-off is
but we're good at that too.
We are, but I think the reality is that when Judge Coney Barrett will be confirmed, and we will return to a full court of 9, 6 of whom will have been appointed by people who did not win the popular vote. The response from the left will probably be to increase the number of justices, and if we're only going to do it to a point that is sufficient to get the things that we want, and so by setting you only get to make this monumental change once, and so you might as well do it to a scale and a degree that makes it harder to replicate over time. And so I think that for us, because we are so obsessed with structures and processes, largely derived out of the Constitution being fundamentally an org chart, the reality is that we should try and adhere as much as possible to that and de-emotionalize and depoliticize the process as much as we can, so that if the reason why people don't know the names of the Supreme Court justices is because there are so many of them, as opposed to a lack of engagement, if that makes sense.
It's funny that you bring up the structure of it, and and I know that we've got framework based on the Magna Carta, all the stuff they taught you in 6th grade. And all of the things that are, that you move forward and you just repeat and you don't necessarily understand what it is. What a lot of people don't recognize is that almost every modern form of government can actually be tied back to shamanistic principles in the tribal council. And the judges in particular, as part of that balance of power, there was always a natural balance of power within shamanism culture. And shamanism culture was across the world. And it was not, it was not something that was necessarily spread because, this was a good idea from these guys, so the Celts do it the same way that the Chinese did it, or the nomads, in Kamchatka did the same thing of the Incas. It just naturally happened, and there's arguments as to how that happened, but there was a general structure of understanding why there were 3 different parts. Stop me if you've heard this one. Where there was the, medicine man, there was the tribal leader from the warrior perspective, and then there was the elder council. Well, all 3 of those, by the way, is exactly what we have today if you break it down into the legislature, the executive, and then the judicial. And part of the reason why they became lifetime appointments was because in shaman, tribalism, in shamanism as a whole, they always wanted to honor someone for their longevity. In other words, like, you've gotten enough experience to this point, and that's why we appoint 60, 70-year-old people to get there. And you've got this kind of flow of dynamic where that's how it came to be. Is a lifetime appointment, does that make sense? Should we culturally, just create a system and say, we need 9 judges, and guess what? Every 3 years, the last one retires, and just go from there. I mean, that would create a structure where it would just be like, who would you appoint? Who would you, whatever, like, and then, but then we would get into the emphasis of your presidential appointment now becomes that much more clogged. And is that system broken? Because you talk about the Electoral College, we're led to believe that one vote and you're pushed into, boom, okay, congratulations, TC and Brandon are going to vote for the same thing. But then we vote, and then we're pitted against, the next county over, because you also have the Electoral College broken down into segments and what have you. And then it's New York against Rhode Island. Well, New York is worth this many, and Pennsylvania is worth this many. We haven't actually done the whole one voice thing. So we're actually sold a bill of goods that doesn't actually translate. What about the energy of the structure itself? Where do you think we can improve? Where do you think we went wrong? And what's right about it?
Well, I think in many ways we could address our original sin, right? I mean, the Electoral College is a byproduct of slave owners protecting their investments and not wanting to get run over by populations elsewhere. And, perhaps the document that said that an African American was 3/5 of a man is not necessarily the best way to design the voting of a government. So, I think that, we're going to start. An electoral college reform is a massive problem and is a big fish that absolutely needs to be fried, but is probably not going to be fried in the short term, frankly. So I think the things you can deal with structurally in the short term are the other pieces of that original sin of slavery, right? You can deal with, we can have an honest to goodness discussion on reparations. We can have an honest to goodness discussion on economic inequalities that are persistent in Black and brown communities, in everything from, redlining in home ownership or college admissions or, you name it. And I think those are places that we can and should start, because until we address, if we're speaking in an empathetic sort of context, right? Until we address that original sin, until we address the reasons why in the middle of a pandemic, people have felt compelled to go to the streets to protest on behalf of the slain members of their community, we cannot really sufficiently address any of the other problems that we see on a domestic scale. And frankly, also, we continue to lose credibility in the international community, right? It's ludicrous to think that we will continue to be moral and ethical leaders in the world and tell China that, for instance, they should not be ethnically cleansing their Muslim population, while our mostly white-led police departments continue to effectively commit acts of genocide against Black and brown communities here in the United States. And so if we would like to resume that mantle of leadership, which of course was flawed to begin with, but if we'd like to resume at least a veiled mantle of leadership in a moral, ethical plane abroad, we absolutely need to fundamentally address those considerations at home.
Yeah, and John, I'm glad that was incredibly eloquent, because one of the parts that I think that you really hit on is the hypocrisy that we kind of live within, and I think that actually was part of the race rage that we went through. I remember I was, I pick up my phone and I have family in Minneapolis, and I get a message, and they're like, "Do you see what's going on here?" And and just without getting our fingers dirty with it, the context of it was, this guy did, it was a subjective situation. Like, you saw it. One person did another thing to another person. Don't even bring up race. Don't even bring up control. One person did something to another person, and everybody wanted to blame one person or the other and not take it into the context of what should actually happen here. And then how did you get here? We couldn't have a mature emotional IQ, a high emotional IQ conversation about it without placing blame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why, the diversity drum, and John, I know we just met. I actually have a background in human resources. My background, my degree is in organizational management, which you wouldn't know by my office. But it's something that, for me, I did a lot of work with diversity. I worked with large companies. I was a recruiting, director. I was somebody that headed up, hey, listen, these numbers are what they are. Mm-hmm. And on one side of it, most of the people that I would report to or have to do statistical analysis to didn't understand why the hell we were doing it. They just roll their eyes and like, whatever. Honestly, most of the time, and this is a solace in it, they wanted a qualified person in the seat, period, end of conversation. They didn't give a rat's ass. They didn't whatever. As a matter of fact, they got angry if they're like, what do you mean I have to kind of do this? What do you mean it needs to be a woman? Like, you just cut my pool in half. I think the solace in that is that I think a lot of people don't necessarily look at it that way. But culturally, organizationally, as the structure, like you said, the sins of the father come in, and it's like, yeah, we never really looked at you the right way. So it's ingrained in all of the voting. It's ingrained in all of the structure. It's ingrained, et cetera, and down the line. Mm-hmm. I know TC wanted to jump in here too. Go ahead, TC.
I'm just so enthralled by your conversation, John. But I wanted to ask, living abroad at this time, how is the general consensus towards the feel of I can't even put it into words other than what the hell is going on in this country. But what's the consensus of others? You're over in England now, mm-hmm. But I'm sure because the way Europe is set up, you can easily not just channel over to Germany for the weekend and have a little backpack experience, or hang down in the south of France because it's a little chilly this week, or maybe take a holiday over to Egypt for just some fun and check the pyramids out before you decide to come home for the weekend. But what does it feel like looking at I can't speak because you're so intimidating with your just I just miss you so much, and I can't even speak too. But I don't want to be belittle it, but we're in a hot mess of this country. And in plain terms, we're in a flipping hot mess. And what is the international communities feel on what the hell's wrong with us?
Well, I think there are two. I think there's. Well, and I'm also very privileged to live in a very international area. Being so close to Oxford and the university community brings in from all around the world. Obviously, continental Europe quite a lot, but all around the world. And I think there's a couple of things that I hear, a couple of threads that I hear most commonly. Sort of first one being that, in regards to Black Lives Matter, there's a certain type of white English person that can kind of understand the white fear that is felt by a lot of white Americans, because England, this tiny speck in the middle of the North Sea, did successfully colonize and conquer significant portions of the known world, largely dominated by Black and brown people, many of whom have now come to the United Kingdom and are, demanding all sorts of jobs and opportunities that, the white aristocracy is not particularly interested in letting go of. So in a lot of ways, there's a lot of very interesting analogous sort of relationships between Black and brown communities here. But I think what they see in America, as far as our response to Black Lives Matter, and particularly obviously coming directly from the White House, is sort of a, this is all coming anyway. Like, why do you think that you can stand in the way of this sort of progress? Which is frankly what I kind of say as well. Because at bare minimum, it's a demographics game, right? In my lifetime, and certainly probably before I have children, the United States will cease to be a majority white country. By the time my kids are my age, the United States will cease to have the primary language being spoken be English. And that's and frankly, that's a good thing. And also is just a reality that is facing white America. And so if we have a problem with that, then we should probably go to Canada or something. But otherwise, that's just the way it's going to work. And it's not about immigration. It's about just population growth. And I think the other thing that Europeans see, and I really hear a lot, both from my European colleagues, but also from those from elsewhere in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, is the world suffers when there's not American global leadership, because we have the ability to not only command great influence elsewhere, but we have a lot of money and we have a lot of power. And when we are able to put that and commit that to things that the global community is in desperate need of, like addressing climate change, we can make a significant impact in the global community. And it's not just in directing our industries to be more green and more energy efficient. And it's not just the massive energy infrastructure pieces we need to do, but it's also, Uganda and Rwanda, where I was privileged to spend some time for work, suffer quite substantially from the impacts of climate change due to, both desertification and increased monsoon seasons. They do not have the ability to substantially inform China about their coal burning practices or the number of people, using inefficient cars, because they don't have that sort of political and economic power. America does. And the places of the world that are the most suffering from both international strife, armed conflict and conflicts caused by climate change, need America to not only have a seat at the table, but to leading the discussion, to effectively ensure progress on issues that affect fundamentally all of us, and most importantly, the least among us.
And I think that's what charges the base, whatever the base may be. And again, I'm certainly trying to stay nonpartisan in this, but you can't, because you've got this duality here of you just brought up like 4 really critical things as to how leadership and the energy of leadership, the decision making of leadership. Listen, you can't say follow me, but don't do as I say, not as I do. That's going to run out of steam eventually. On the other side of that, you've also got this dynamic of, and just say climate change. We're a work in progress, and this is a true to form energy statement. When I say this, I say to people all the time, I don't care what you believe in, you have to believe in something. The atheist, or even the agnostic to a certain degree, but an atheist who has no belief system of we're worm food on the day we die, doesn't really understand the spiritual connection that you might have in all of this. And we talk about the life path of a person. What am I meant to do? Maybe the United States is meant to be this leader, to kind of be this guardian, to the world, to say, like, listen, let's just keep it even. The polarizing effect of this, and the thing that never lets you get to your goals, is when you have the infighting, is when you have all of this. And again, that conspirituality thing that I talked about before, that takes off, because it's like, well, we don't really want this. And, we want a computer in every classroom now, and we want to have a network like this. We want to close the school. It becomes this kind of snowball that gets out of control, that gets to be so much that personally, somebody sitting in upstate New York that's about to go vote at the poll is just like, I have to like a person because of their, not because of their political value, but because of their soft skill. Did you see that debate? They mopped them up. Oh, did you see that? I heard, the last article that I read, it's amazing to me. I think every political, I don't even want to say every political, I would say the vast majority of, say, presidential races were pretty predictable. And when things kind of flipped upside down, and again, you can make the political argument, the alarm clock didn't go off for the Democrats that day, or the base was really charged in a way that they didn't see. You can make all of those arguments. But I think on the flip side of that, the part that activated everybody, and maybe this is why we're going through this, was the energy of, are you paying attention to this? Do you not recognize that we have a responsibility for all the things you just said? Rwanda's looking at us to say, we're choking over here. We're the person that's at the adversarial. And the attitude that comes in says, well, we don't have to do that because we think that's debunked science. We actually don't believe in climate change. That's a that's a BS reason to get out of a responsibility to have an opinion and stick up for people. And it's not all about the bottom line. And I think that's where we really get polarizing, because we all have a checkbook. And if we say, if this person appeals to the fact of, I want more money, or if that doesn't make sense, or we don't pay attention to that, it becomes a cop out. And how do you feel the energy of our responsibility of the leadership, quality to this? What do you think really has to happen to make that change? And by the way, I can make the argument in a completely bipartisan way that the last 16 years has lost some of that steam and that leadership. What do you think we need?
I mean, I think I think this is true both for the climate change discussion and for the race discussion. We need to, in particular, white America needs to be willing to do the work and have that work mean that we lose something. Have that work mean that, not everyone, especially people. I used to live, I lived in DC for eight years. The number of pickup trucks for people who live in apartment buildings and don't haul anything was astonishing. And
what a great analogy.
And, I think it comes down to yes, that probably should be, first of all, you probably should just ride the metro anyway. Also, it'll save you money. And it's good for the planet. But even if you insist on keeping a car, it probably should be a hybrid or an electric car, because it will do less damage to our earth and to our city. And in the case of white America, right, there is no reality in the rectifying of the damage that we have done to Black communities for literally hundreds of years since we ripped them from their homes, and our ancestors ripped them from their homes, dragged them across the ocean, and forced them to work for free. That does not involve giving up some kind of payment, whether it's new economic opportunity zones that are exclusive to Black and brown communities and not to white people, whether it's investment structures, whether it's straight up direct cash transfers that there's reparations from the government that comes out of my taxes. There is no work. We have been, and it's true in general for America, right? We have pretty much gotten everything we wanted for literally hundreds of years. And there are consequences to that. And there needs to be recompense for the negative effect. The obsession, for instance, with fossil fuels is largely driven out of, frankly, a U.S. financial interest market, because we are the world's largest producer of cars. We
love our cars, and your example actually just really solidified that there's an ego to it. I mean, DC's got a great public transportation system. DC, you talk about the eco-friendly cars and that sort of thing, but then why do you get cars that aren't that? It's because I want a truck. It's like there's an ego drive to here, but isn't there also an ego to, say, the race relationship card? And I'll say this, since we're conditioned to just be are you entitled to compensation? You can't turn on the TV and not hear some sort of, ad from a lawyer. Did this happen to you? Did that happen to you?
Sure.
Class actions,
I think about
whatever.
the mesothelioma ads that I always would see back home. Yeah.
My gosh. Well, I don't know if they've actually done a lot for finding reparation, but it certainly has educated us, because now we've all gone mesothelioma. And,
actually, I never worked in a pit mine, so I have no idea. Yeah.
You're like, I've never even been to Kentucky. So, but then the other side of that is, aren't we kind of, even in and this isn't me refuting you, but I think it's as you were talking about this, and you said something incredibly important. You said, okay, as a white, just as a white race that has always gotten what they've wanted, we have to be able to give something up. Well, then the point of view, from the Black community or the slave derivative community, let's say it that way, deserves some sort of reparation to this. What if both sides gave up at the same time? What if the power control conversation was let go, while the you owe me control, is there as well? Because I think that's the tension that we feel. I think that's the energetic value of I think you hear this from the white power part of it, and again, that's
sure.
said incorrectly. But
Yeah.
where do you draw the line? Where do you say this is enough money? Where do you say all of the what will actually make this even? I think the correct answer in the grander scheme of things is it'll never be enough. It's never going to be there. So how do you game plan that? You work a lot with diversity at Oxford,
Mm-hmm.
and you work within programs. How do you feel those programs like are tangible and on the on the ground floor of making those things balanced? How does that operate for you guys?
Well, I think first to your point, I think I hear you on the where does that end piece, but I will say that we've never really even asked sufficiently where does it start, and so I agree that perhaps at some point we'll need to have that discussion, but if we've spent more than 2 decades blocking every congressional attempt to have even a commission to study reparations, I think that we don't even have an accurate understanding of where we could even begin to, and we can have a discussion about where it ends when we're already on the way. But no one's opened Google Maps, so I don't know how to get there is I think the best way to put it. And I think
I like that analogy because I think that's part of the energy. I think that's part of people's frustration because we literally say to ourselves, like, I don't know where to start, but I'm not doing that. You can't logically tell me when we're going to be even.
Yeah. And I think on the working for a university, working for a prominent university, working for a university that has literally educated aristocracy in both this country, all across continental Europe, and at least one president of the United States, right? I think for us, I can't speak to the entire university, but I can speak particularly to the business school where I'm seconded. We see things from a business perspective, right? Which is companies that have more diverse boards, companies that have more diverse workforces make more money. They are just more successful. Also, they're more likely to be ethical members of business communities and societies. And so if our job is, as one of the top 10 global business schools in the world, is to educate reasonably the next generation of business leaders, we are not only doing the world a disservice by not forcing our students to go through training on social impact, we're also actually not producing the best opportunity for them to be successful business leaders because business entities understand the importance of having these intersectionalities in their business models. And so, but that involves like actually putting, we have to walk the walk and do the work. Yeah. And so a good example of that is that we're the only business school in the entire global north that has committed to having at least 10% of every single MBA class being students from Africa. Not like African, like not necessarily we are, globally diversifying them. But we are having students that are coming specifically from the African continent because while we recognize that global diversity is very important, right now we need to focus on this. And we need to address the fact that there is a massive dearth of business education in the African context. And so how do we do that? We go to donors and we specifically ask for funding for specifically this purpose, right? You don't get anything else out of it. The purpose of this is that we're going to give these African students the opportunity to come here, receive a world-class education, receive the opportunity to live in an Oxford environment they otherwise wouldn't have had access to. And then we don't tell them what they do with that education. Not a lot of them do wind up going home, founding their own businesses or working there. But you know what? It's their lives. If they want to stay here and they want to work in the United Kingdom, that's up to them too. And by the way, direct cash transfers is actually an excellent way of providing for development back home. So like them making more money here and sending money home to grandma is actually a pretty effective way of fueling development in their home countries. So I think that for us, it comes down to students and what we're training them, but it also comes down to who is in the room. And if we are not diversifying our portfolio of students, then we can't really expect the business community to substantially change. And so we see that as our driving mission.
I want to talk about the charity here in a second because I know that you work closely with expanding that. But I want to ask a question, about the diversity program. And Do you think that if you have true effectiveness in that equality conversation,
Mm-hmm.
do you also have the ability to well, what you're doing going to be effective over the long haul? If you take 10% from from the African continent and begin to kind of populate that, obviously you're going to need to see that over generations. Over the last 20 years, it's X amount, and then you can kind of grow it from there. Do you think that alone can actually be this effective pendulum swing that we're really kind of looking for?
I mean, we are one of 170 some odd business schools around the world. We accept 380 some odd students a year. We are doing what we can with our slice of the pie, but we also recognize the, how do I put this? The ontological power that having Oxford be someone who is making this commitment has, right? So now we made this commitment at the World Economic Forum 6-7 years ago. Since 2016, we have exceeded that target every single year. So
congratulations.
From 2014 to 2016, we met the 10% number, and since then we've exceeded it at every single class. And the one big thing that we have seen is other business schools, other universities, specifically in Europe, coming and asking us how we did it. And
Amazing.
for us, that's the most important piece, right? Because setting obviously, it's cool and it's flashy and it's good for us from a CSR perspective and it makes us look good. But in the end, that's not actually the goal, right? Because the students are here for 1 year. Sure, some of them will give us money. Many of them will not. And it's not just about us benefiting us as Oxford, because in the grand scheme of things, this one program is not really going to do much for our brand that 850 years of history isn't already doing. But I think it's the reality of, if we are willing to put our money where our mouth is and build a model that actually successfully works, we can go to our partners and our competitors or have them come to us and set a standard that then others want to achieve. And that emphasis on global leadership is also a really important aspect of the work as well. And we hope that will continue to grow.
And I have to say this, because I think this kind of ties the entire concept around you established, and I think we understand this, but I think in this entire conversation we established that the United States has a responsibility because it's the richest country in the world. The political value is, there's money to be had on both sides, but what we do with our money is really what we're arguing over. The legislation, how our judges act, and all of that. Even how you were talking about operating was putting your money where your mouth is. If you were to take this entire podcast and replace the word money with energy, it is the true to form concept of why people that are growing in their intuition are so frustrated with us, because they're seeing the energy leak out the back. They're seeing the energy mismanaged, misused, whatever. And I would even say this, to encourage your donors, talk about money as energy. Because I think that's actually what is appealing to me about what you were saying. Money where your mouth is, when you start to value your energy, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make X amount of dollars, I'm going to donate it to you. I know that energy is going to be put to good use. Part of our argument with a bad politician, not naming names, but not to blame a particular politician, is that we see a waste of energy. We see a waste of opportunity. And that's the thing that I think frustrates us. So I want to wrap up. I want to ask you about your charity that you work with. Tell us a little bit about what you love to support, and you're going to be able to look down below and able to clink on it. Listen, for me to go through an entire political conversation and not bring up the clink, that's pretty good. But we're going to have a link to click on underneath here. John, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I try to be charitable in lots of ways, but I think, in the upcoming, one of the most important things for us as American citizens is our access to the right to vote. And for many people who live, particularly in Florida, 2018 was a fundamentally important year because of a referendum that was passed by the Florida public that reenfranchised literally almost 2 million people who live in Florida who had previously lost their voting rights because they're formerly incarcerated. There is now a really significant logistical problem, basically driven down by there is not really a system for effectively evaluating who has had fines and other reparations and paid up in order to have their voting rights restored. And so one project that I particularly want to emphasize that I have given to, and I hope others will as well, is the Florida Restorative Rights Coalition, which is a group of lots of nonprofits across the state of Florida that are working with those that, are formerly incarcerated, have paid their debt to society, in many cases have paid thousands of dollars in debt to society, and by law should have their rights restored, but are largely getting bogged down by literal paperwork. FRRC works with local county clerks and works with formerly incarcerated persons themselves to give them access to the right to vote and to reenfranchise them. And so I would like to plug their work. I think that they do thankless work.
It's fantastic.
And I hope that others will join me in supporting them and ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to vote, both in this election and in many elections to come.
Yeah, and even though we just razzed our system and our process for being broken, it's still a really good process in terms of when it's running correctly. You're like, okay, that makes sense. You get the energy of ego, and you get the energy of misfortune or malpractice or all the things of human nature that screws it up. But I really like this, and I really encourage that. And it goes beyond, the part that I really like about this is that it goes beyond just get out there and vote. It's actually talking about people that did what they were supposed to do. Granted, they got caught doing something they should have been doing. They went through their process. And now we have this is a perfect example of a process that doesn't make sense because you've stacked the cards against it. And again, I love that you presented that without actually talking about race, but we all know that the incarceration statistics go a certain way, but it's also non-discriminate. If everybody has to, fill out that same paperwork, why shouldn't they be able to have a political opinion? Why shouldn't they be able to have a vote? Because they've done what they're supposed to do. I think that's amazing. And John, I want to invite you back here. I hope you don't run away and send an email afterwards burn this. No.
This was great. I really enjoyed my time.
We have a different way of looking at energy. We have a different way of looking at how your intuition comes together. And, one of these times I want to invite you back, certainly as we go through our political cycle, but also to get to know a little bit more about how you do your world adventures. TC dropped about 200 hints about your world travel right from your, you walk right down and you're in France 2.5 hours later. That's fascinating to me, but that's a story for another day.
Maybe when COVID will allow us to travel again. No, I've been very lucky. I've been given a lot of privileges to travel, both to represent my country and also to, and just for fun as well. So happy to come back and talk and in general.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Russ. You already know I love to talk, but did you also know that I love to create music and soundscapes? Well, my latest CD, Sanctuary, is going to be out June 12th. This CD was created as part of my journey. It has soothing piano, sound bowls, and guitar. I really enjoyed making this, and it is part of my journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the soundscapes that are created. Some of them have very specific flow to them, while others are very kind of just meditative. I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed making it. Sanctuary, a meditative space, is now available at iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, and other great online music centers. Thank you again. See you soon. And wherever your journey takes you, remember to keep going.